Hello, everyone, and welcome to my masterclass. This is your host, Chess Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan. One of the things I really need you to do is arm yourself with paper and pen, or paper and pen pencil. I need you to write things down because we're going to compare your first attempts to your next attempts. In these classes that I want to share with you, so I really want to emphasize chess fundamentals, and by that I mean the elements: space, time, material, pawn structure, king position. I want you to think in those terms, and I want you to think about those terms as we explore positions together and figure out how to make a plan in any given position based solely on the elements. A lot of people come to me and go, yes, I don't know how to plan. I don't know how to make a plan. Well, that's what these classes are going to be all about, is making a plan. And for this lesson, I chose the following game. It was played in the World Championship in New York in 1990 between Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov, arguably two of the greatest chess players in the world, in the history of chess. And it was the third game in that World Championship match. And let's get to it. And away we go. So Talia was white, and in those days, Garry loved to play the King's Indian. And these are all the very, very standard opening moves of the King's Indian. And Karpov played bishop e3, which is called Gligorich's variation. And the idea of this variation, this opening for white, is to get the pieces arranged by white in the most harmonious way that you can. So if black makes a very root development move, like, for example, knight c6, then after d5, knight e7, he gets hit with this very nice move, knight d2. In normal King's Indian defense positions, black is trying to play the move f7, f5, and get a kingside attack going, but we can see that the bishop is now on f2 rather than c1, where it provides both defensive functions as well as attacking functions. And with the move knight c4, white gets a nice advantage. Therefore, when playing against a Gligorich variation, most games go knight g4, bishop g5, f6, and either the bishop goes back to c1 or it goes back to the h4 square. And it's a very different, awkward kind of a King's Indian. Uh-oh, something happened.
Just giving people the coordinates.
Okay, yes, of course. The board. Okay. It's good. Thank you, Eric. All right. Yeah, we're all favorites. Okay, so Garry plays the move queen e7, which really had a bad reputation, and everybody thought, what's Garry doing? Because, okay, the early queen move does have an X-ray attack, but this move, queen e7, had a bad reputation. Karpov played d takes e5, and I just wanted to show that, yeah, this is white's best move. If Karpov had played d5 to stop this latent threat to the pawn, then knight g4, and the situation's radically changed. White can't open up the center, he can't occupy the center, the bishop would have to move, and now it's much easier for black to get in his f5 break. If white were to castle, then this falls for knight takes, pawn takes, knight takes, queen takes, a nifty way of just heisting a pawn in open broad daylight. as black wins a pawn. But the move queen e7, again, had a bad reputation, and the reason it had a bad reputation was because it takes knight d5. Somebody had previously tried knight takes d5 and gone pawn grubbing, and I assure you it certainly was not me, because even I would recognize that in this position, grabbing the pawn really is not to be recommended. White has really fantastic play on the queen side, including the fact that he's a very big favorite to one day simply capture this pawn on c7. So Gary played queen back to d8, and Karpov played bishop c5, and Gary a la tempo played knight takes e4. And at first glance at least, this looks pretty impressive for black. If you capture the rook and then king captures, well, you've got a bishop and a pawn for an exchange. This knight is going to get kicked away. But the problem with this whole line is bishop e7. Now you suddenly start to see, if black's queen gets detached from this pawn on c7, for example, queen e8, then this bishop will capture. So we began to think that, Gary had made a finger failure, or he had messed up his preparation, and that he was in trouble. Karpov took the rook, takes queen c2. At the time, although we didn't know it, this was actually the second best move in the position. Gary's preparation was just simply awesome. It was beyond incredible. Gary has decided that he's going to go in for a queen sacrifice in a position that we all thought that he had made an opening error. Knight c5, rook d1. So white's up material, and he's got this devastating threat of knight c6 with a knight b6, pardon me, with a double attack against the queen, against the rook. It looks like Kasparov's toast. Kasparov says, go ahead, take my queen. Whoa, we were all kind of taken aback. This is pretty amazing stuff. Karpov goes into a deep think and castles, not taking the queen. So Kasparov goes knight e6 and says, excuse me, but I insist that you win my queen. If you don't win my queen, I'm ready to plant a knight on d4, play the move c5, c6, and I will have an excellent position. So Karpov says, all right, I'm going to take your queen. We're still in Gary's preparation. So now Gary has a pawn and two minor pieces for the queen. But that can't be a good deal for him, can it? Well, as you start thinking and seeing what's going on, one thing you're looking at is that there's going to be an incredibly powerful knight on d4. That's going to gum up the d file. This bishop might swing over to c6. This bishop on g7 is patrolling this long diagonal. In short, this more compensation here than meets the eye. Queen d2, not a very good move. At the time, we all thought that white should play a move like, for example, a3, just defending the pawn. After f5, queen d2, bishop d7, knight g5, seeking to try to trade off a pair of minor pieces. Now, maybe after a3, f5 is a little bit too early. For example, we could preface it with h6, and whether we play queen d2 or rook d1, no real difference. We'll drop the bishop back, and Gary would continue to develop the game, his game, with two minor pieces and a pawn versus the queen. Instead, Karpov played queen d2 at once. The bishop dropped back to e8. He played b3. Kasparov played e4, knight to e1, a poor move. Again, the move knight to g5 was suggested. f5, bishop d1, knight e5, knight c2. And we're coming closer and closer to the position that we are going to analyze deeply together, you and I. After the move knight e5, we were beginning to understand that this was no finger failure by Garry Kasparov, but he was really developing an attack, and a very impressive one at that. For example, queen d5, bishop c6, queen takes, rook e8 is one example where White could get his queen trapped, or his finger caught in the cookie jar. Another one is queen d5, king e7, queen takes b7, bishop c6, oopsie daisy. And if you look at White's pieces, well, 4 of them are on the first rank. So Karpov played knight e2, rook takes, queen d5, king e7, a very, very good move, knight b4. Now here, unfortunately, Gary did himself a disservice. He played the move c6, and he could have saved himself a great deal of pain if he had just simply played bishop c6 at once, queen takes, king takes, knight takes, which returns to the game position, except it's a vastly improved version of the game for black. In the game, Gary played c6, queen takes, knight takes. And now we're coming, or we have arrived at our key position, where your pen and paper are starting to come in handy. In this position, what I would like you to do is answer a few questions for me. Just a second, where are my questions? I have prepared okay, here we go. If you want to play chess well, you must always be thinking about improving your pieces, okay? You must always be thinking about the elements of chess, the material, the king's position, the structure. You must be thinking about your trumps, okay? So in this position, you are black. You are Garry Kasparov. You are playing for the World Chess Championship. Yeah, nice, right? What I want you to do is create 2 plans of how you would arrange your pieces and pawns. 2 very distinct plans. Where would you put your bishops? What squares would you put your knight? How would you set up your pawns? I would like you to write those 2 plans down. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes, actually. But I want you to put down a series of, not moves, but of where the pieces belong in your mind. What would be the ideal squares for the black pieces and the black pawns? And I need you to write down 2 plans. Which square do you want the bishop on e8 to land? What square do you want the bishop on g7? What square do you want the knight on e5? And what about the king? Aha! Where would you like to see black's king? On what square? And then what about the queen side pawns? And what about the king side pawns? King on b3, c5, bishop on c3, bishop on g7, knight on d3. Nice. The bishop on e8 should be on f7. Okay. c5, bishop d6, knight d3, king f6, bishop c6. Not bad. I like it. t8. King on b4. Okay, king on b4, there's a knight on a2. Bishop f8, bishop f7, king f6, knight d3. Okay, I am seeing a lot of where the pieces should go. I'd like to understand where you might also be putting pawns. Remember, you've got 2 pawns and a bishop. So, for example, would you like to see the pawn going from f5 to f4? Give us the answers. Give us the answers. How about that? Okay. So I hope you've written down 2 plans. 2 plans. Because I would like you to think in a different way for just a moment. Gary played in the game knight f7, which in my view is a very bad move by Gary. I give it a question mark, only because it doesn't lose material, is why I don't give it a second question mark. But it's a very, very bad move. What on earth was Gary thinking? If you want to play chess well, you must always be thinking about how to improve your position, your pieces, by using the space count. You must identify your own trumps. What do I mean by the space count? Well, it's very simple. On the chessboard, 64 squares. My opponent has 32 squares. I have 32 squares between the 4th and 5th rank. Is the equator, and black's squares, all of black's squares are basically in this rectangle right here. Those 32 squares belong to black. The other 32 squares belong to white. What is the space count right here, right now? The space count for white is very simple. This pawn on c4 attacks 2 squares, d5 and b5. This bishop on d1 attacks 1 square. So that's 3 for white. 3 for white. How about black? This pawn on e4 attacks 2 squares. This pawn on f5 attacks 2 squares, the e4 and g4 pawns. That's 4. Those 2 pawns already control more space than white controls. What about this knight on e5? The knight on e5 controls d3, c4, f3, and g4. The space count is 8 to 3 in black's favor. What's the material count? What's the material count for the position? What's the material count? Equal. It's equal. Exchange for 2 pawns. It's equal. Even. But better king. It's even but better king.
That's interesting. Okay, for those of you who saw the first chess lesson, you should know it's not equal. That in fact, the material balance is in black's favor. Why? Because the bishop is worth 3.5, 3.5. And the imbalance is the dark squared bishop, the e4 pawn, as well as the b6 pawn. So 3.5 for the bishop, 1 for the e4 pawn, 1 for the b6 pawn. That's 5.5 versus the rook's 5. So from the material point of view, black stands slightly better. But in my view, the position is a stone cold win. Stone cold, huge, just absolutely off the chart, enormous advantage for black. Enormous advantage. Why? Because of the space count. So when we start thinking about what black's goals should be, we should start thinking about how to improve the pieces. And when we're thinking about how to improve the pieces, what I'm specifically talking about is gaining space, activating our pieces and our pawns so that we control more space of our opponents than before. When I look at this position, I see a terrible bishop on e8. This bishop really needs to improve itself. How is it going to improve itself? Well, you're either going to play c6, c5, and bishop to c6, or you're going to play g6 to g5 and bishop to g6. Either way, that bishop has to come out. When we think about the space count, we should also think about our other trumps. What did I say the material imbalance was? Well, we've got a dark square bishop, the bishop on g7, and two pawns, the e4 pawn and the b6 pawn versus the rook. So all of our battles that we want to fight should be fought on the dark squares. Why? Because the imbalance of the bishop on g7 versus the rook is an imbalance that's in our favor. We want to fight on the dark squares. We don't want to fight on the light squares, because on the light squares, our opponent could easily battle and potentially win. So we need to put our pieces on squares that increase our space count, and we need to fight on the dark squares. Okay. With the space count in mind, only thinking about the space count, now I want you to do a third effort with creating a plan. I want you to think about taking as much space away from our opponents and controlling as many squares as possible by using the space count and thinking about where our pieces would be absolutely ideally best placed. Secondly, while you're making this third effort at a new plan, I want you to think about where the squares, what battle on what squares do you want the battle to take place? Okay, you're going to get a couple of minutes. I'm going to monitor the chat. You're welcome through the chat to send me your ideas, but now that you know, to think about your plan from the perspective of the space count only, just that, only the space count. Tell me what you would do. Where are the pieces going to go? King f6, g5, g4, attack f2. Do I want to fight for the e3 square? Bishop h6 gains 4 squares. Power balance. Beginning to think about it. Web 4 master. Very good. Knight d3. Bishop d4. And c5. Aha! That feels like a lot of space. You didn't tell me what you were going to do with your king, though. Knight d3. c5. Bishop c6. Very good, Pete to Pete, but that only takes care of 2 of your pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm counting 4 black pieces here, guys. Come on. You've got 4 pieces to work with. Knight d3. Trade off on c4 to reduce white space and free up bishop on e8. h5, h4, h3. c5. Knight c6 to d4. b6 to b5. Bishop c6. Sis, get it? 91. I'd give you a reward if I'd give you a chocolate chip cookie if you were sitting right next to me there. That felt like something very, very good. Thank you, Mr. Salmon. The king should go to e5. Knight d3, bishop d4, king e5, bishop g6, g5, and f4. Very good. Push the pawns. Now you guys are really doing very, very well. I love it. Bishop g6, get ready to push to e3, forcing open the diagonal. And then the king can route its way through bishop d4 and c5. I like it. Knight d3, bishop d4, c5, bishop c6, king e5. Very, very good. Very, 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 very good. This is fantastic. No, you guys are doing really, really well. And indeed, when you start to think through the elements, space times force, space, time, force, pawn structure, king position, the answers become very, very easy in terms of what should I do. When we think about the space count, the move knight f7, instantly becomes senseless. That knight on e5 hits 4 squares. Had Gary played knight d3, everything lights up. It's so spectacularly obvious. When the knight was on the e5 square, it controlled 4 squares. Now that, now that it's on the d3 square, boom, okay, it controls, just a second. I'm trying to get rid of these arrows that I'm making. Okay. It controls 6 squares, trust me. This bishop on g7, it controls 4 squares. So with the move knight e5 to d3, the knight improves by 2 squares. The bishop improves by 4 squares. From the space count perspective, black's pieces increase by 6. In my mind's eye, this bishop is going to come to d4. And then our king is going to go to e5. But the bishop on d4, in a sense, interferes with our king. Imagine that black's king, which is a very powerful piece, was on the square d2. White's pieces would all be completely frozen. This incredibly powerful king on d2. There would be a bishop on d4. And this bishop on e8. What am I going to do with that? In my view, there's 2 routes. You can go c5 and bishop c6, or g5 and bishop to g6. I like c5 and bishop c6 because I also like the idea of trading off one of my double pawns with the move b6, b5. Any trades and my bishop will be recapturing on b5. I also like the move c5 because I want one of the battle squares to be the square d4, a dark square battle. If I put a knight on d4 and white manages to trade knights on d4, I can recapture with the pawn, and I have two central pawns that I can push up the board. Let's imagine what would have happened if Gary had played the move knight d3. Let's suppose bishop e2. Now, in this case, black faces, bishop takes d3, e takes d3, and maybe the pawn is a little bit too far. There is a rook coming to d1. I want you to think, and I want you to write down a good answer for black, and I'm going to be right back.
You gotta take the mic out?
Yeah, no, the TV's. Okay. Write it down on the paper. Yes, I love it. Knight to f4, knight to f4, bishop to h6. Called it. King to e5, knight to b2. Okay, knight to b2. Knight f4 with tempo. All right. Okay. Now, the best move, in my opinion, is knight to f4. Why? Well, you're returning the favor of attacking the bishop on e2 with the gain of tempo. For those of you who wanted to play knight to b2 with the idea of attacking with your king, also take a very deep bow, because that move shows a great deal of creativity as well. What black's idea would be is bishop to d4, king to e5, f4, and pressing forwards, and this knight on b2 attacks the d1 square, so the rook can never utilize the d file. That shows a lot of creativity in my view. However, I like the move knight f4 best. Why? Because knights really do like centralized squares, and the ideal square for the knight is actually the d4 square. In this case, the knight is attacking the bishop on e2. Let's imagine that white plays the move rook e1. Rook e1. Okay. Now again, from the perspective of the space count, give me what you think would be black's best move from the perspective of the space count. And I'll monitor the chat. Pawn to c5. Very nice. Bishop to d4, pawn to c5. King to e7, so you can play knight e6 to d4. Very good, rook crusher. Bishop to d4, bishop to d4, knight to h, bishop to d4. Bravo, bravo. Indeed, bishop to d4, exclamation mark. The bishop is simply excellent on g7. It controls 4 squares. But why not improve the bishop on this diagonal as well by posting up on the square d4. Let's imagine the move king f1. Now, once more, from the perspective of the space count, what's black's best move? From the perspective of a space count, what is black's best move? Bravo. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it. Very nice. Very nice. Very nice. Okay. I'm seeing a number of suggestions for the move c5. And I really like the move c5. So if you thought about c5, take a bow, because you increase your space count not by 2, and this is very, very important, but you increase the space count by 3. So that is one of your 2 very, very best moves. The move I like the best is king e5. Because when you play the move king e5, you also increase the space count by 3. But you also protect both the knight as well as the bishop. And in this particular case, this specific position, you also give yourself a chance to play your knight around from f4 to e6, and then later to this very, very powerful square d4. On f4, the knight can be assailed. In other words, it can be attacked. On d4, it's going to be a real Thor. g3, knight e6, h4. So this is all a theoretical game, and I was actually playing with the computer. The computer was trying to play the best moves that it could for the white side, and we've got this position. Now again, from the perspective of the space count, what would be a terrific move or possibilities for black? What would you do if you were black and you were only thinking about the position from the space count? Now f4 is looking good. h5, f5 to f4, knight c5, g5 all the way, f4 for the space, g5, g4, h3, b5, g5, easy! Easy! So easy, g5, okay. Well, one of the things that you also want to do is, as you're making your moves, making your plans, you've got to link the pieces together, right? So there's a type of a harmony. I love the idea of g5, but I would like to do it with h6 and g5 and be able to recapture with the pawn on g5. And then when I have a pawn on g5, I could play f4. So for example, h6, so let's say king g2. This was the computer's best move, g5. I'm gaining space, but also don't forget I've opened up his position, opened up the rook's position, so I've allowed a little bit of play for black's rook. Bishop e3. Here the computer says that black has a nearly winning position, and I don't doubt it. So the move h6 is a really, really good move. My preferred move is c5. And why is that? Because once again, this for me is 2 and 3 in the space count. And I'm really anxious to bring the bishop into the game. The game might continue, for example, king g2. I just played around with the knight against the computer because I wanted to emphasize the helplessness that black is under. The move rook c1 is combined with the idea of bringing this knight, which is really pretty pathetic, on a2, either to the d5 or b5 squares. Knight here, rook b1, bishop here to attack this pawn. The knight has to do something, and then h6. And here I was just flogging the computer so badly that we had to give the computer a rest, because it's very, very clear what is happening. Black is ready to play g5 and f4, and essentially he has complete control of the board. If you look at white's pieces, the rook on b1, what's the space count for the rook? Nothing. Rook has no space. What's the space count for the knight on c1? Nothing. Yeah, the rook on b1, is that worth 5 when all it's doing is defensive duty? The bishop on e2, it attacks 1 square. Is it worth 3 when all it's doing is defending a pawn on c4? In the meanwhile, black is ready to gain more and more and more space. He may, for example, continue bishop c5, bishop d4 to c3, bring this knight back to the d4 square. He may, in some cases, even follow up with his king. Okay, so we leave it there, and now we're going to return back to what was played. So after knight f7, Karpov, who's basically on the back foot, played the move bishop e2. He's just hoping that he can get his knight back into the game somehow, some way, either by knight c1 or by rook c1 and knight c3, knight d6. I really have to ask, where is Gary going with that knight? I think that this is really a strange way of him playing, and I really does confuse me. Knight d6, knight b4. Now, knight b4. So we can see that this knight might go back to c2, and it might go to e3. Gary played the move bishop c3, and I'm very reluctant to give this move a question mark. Why? Because on the one hand, the bishop takes out a better position. The bishop is significantly improved by moving to c3. On the other hand, in chess, when your opponent's pieces are not effective, well, leave them where they are. The knight on b4 is not a very effective piece at all, in my view. And don't move it. Don't just let it sit wherever it is. I would be thinking about how to improve the bishop on e8. And in this case, it's very clear. Start with the move g5. That's worth 2 in the space count, by the way. Follow it up with the bishop going to g6. Follow it up with f4. And that bishop on g6 will be very, very well improved. Bishop c3, knight c2, f4. I like this move. Don't get me wrong. I like this move because it improves in the space count. On a good day, you could go knight to f5, c5, bishop c6, and knight to d4. And if you could get all of those moves in, hey, it's looking good. Rook d1, and this move, I really, I simply don't like that move at all. Another one of those head scratchers. Again, from the perspective of space, I want you to tell me what black's best move is here. From the perspective of space, what is black's best move? H5 does indeed stop bishop g4. King e5. Very, very good. King e5, obviously. And I also think king e5 is obviously a very, very powerful move. Somebody said, well, you could stop bishop g4, but if your king was sitting there on e5, why would I even care about bishop g4? I go king e5, and if you go bishop g4, I go h5, and I'd be laughing because this bishop simply has no space to improve, and goodness gracious, it could end up just getting trapped, and most likely the bishop would actually end up having to go back, and I get the tempo h5 for free. So for me, this move king e5 is a really, really powerful, and I want to say in some ways an obvious move. Let's imagine that white tries to fight back and plays the move g3, attacking the pawn on f4. What's a good move for black? g5, f3, g5, f3, g5, f3. Exactly. So on the one hand, for those of you who said f3, that to my mind looks like a very good move. On the other hand, aren't we giving a square for our opponent's pieces? f3 gains 2. Well, it doesn't gain 2. It keeps or retains 2 in the space count. We really wouldn't want to trade, would we? If we traded off this pawn, which was good for our space count, well, we didn't help our space count at all. So for me, the best move would be g5. And imagine after takes, what on earth would we do, for example, if white played the move king h1? White's very, very clever idea is to play rook to g1, gaining something in the space count. What would be a very good move for black? c5, bishop c6. Don't forget that if you play the move c5, you might be giving white's rook a move. Indeed. Very good. I, too, think that the move bishop g6 is simply awesome. It improves the bishop, it improves the bishop space count, and it sets up a devastating idea of e3 with a discovered attack against this knight on c2. Let's see how the game continued. Anatoly, he does his best. He's trying to create a battle along the light squares. He's trying to make a blockade on the light squares. And this is where, in my opinion, Garry Kasparov missed his best chance. Garry played the move h4, which was a waste of tempo. for the audience, for the last time, give me two moves based on the space count that would be better than the move h4. They should be obvious. They should be obvious. Okay, I'm seeing king e5, that's one. And I'm seeing c5, that's two. That's absolutely right. In both cases, you're gaining 3 with the space count. You're going to go c5 and bishop c6, or you're going to go king e5, which is great for the space count, as is c5. c5 is great for the space count. This bishop will be attacking this square. The pawn on c5 will be controlling 2 squares. Let's imagine, for example, c5. Let's just put that on the board. King, king. And we get this position. All right. From the perspective of the space count, and also think in terms of the trumps in your hand, the position that's good for you, what would be a good move with a space count? Bishop d2, h4, knight f7, bishop c6. Aha! Rubik got it. Rubik 87, take a bow. That's absolutely right. b5. This pawn on c4 controls 2 squares, does it not? Well, how about the move b5? Let's get rid of that pawn. Or, conversely, let this pawn gain 2 and bring the pawn on b7 up the board for an increase in the space count. Or if we like, for example, let's say rook g1, just for argument's sake, takes, let's say king f6, just to stop this rook from attacking. Now we're ready to go bishop to c2 and win this pawn. This was the key moment, in my opinion, that Gary let things slip, is he didn't play this. He played instead this tempo loss h4, and now he was just a little bit too late with his b5 because of check, rook d5, and Karpov had essentially saved the game. I think it was this position. It was just, no, not yet. Knight c3 check, king f1, bishop g6, knight e1, king d6. This is the adjourned position. The players are adjourned. They came back the next day and they played perfunctory moves. They had figured it all out. And it was in a wonderful save by Anatoly Karpov. You can look the game up, and this is the last tactic, so to speak, in the position. You don't fall for king takes g2, because after king takes g2, bishop check, and you spear the rook. But instead, after the move g2, what should Anatoly Karpov play? Yes, the chess Chad has got it right. Rook takes d1, king takes g2. And the game was agreed to a draw. For me, this was an extraordinary game from the perspective of the awesome opening preparation by Garry Kasparov, to almost a perfect realization of his opening advantage until he didn't play what was a whole slew, a series of really, really powerful and obvious moves that improved his position and improved his control of the space count. As we continue in this master series, we're going to continue thinking about chess from the elements, from the perspective of the elements: space count, pawn structure, material, time development, and king's position. And when we use the elements, it always gives us a plan, and not only a plan, but generally speaking, a correct plan. It may sound like tough that, boy, you're juggling 5 things, the material count, the time count, the space count, pawn structure, but once you start to really get into that flow and thinking in those terms, it's like the fundamentals of anything. At first, they seem hard, but then you just take them for granted until you're at the point where all the moves just make perfect sense and they're flowing. I hope you enjoy our classes. We're going to do a lot more, we hope. I've got a lot more examples of the space count and how to make a plan. I had actually brought a fun game that I wanted to show you, but this one kind of took a little bit too long. We used up a whole hour. It went by really, really too fast for me. The next time I can show you a game that was really, really a lot of fun. But I hope you're enjoying, and we'll do more as we continue to try to push our subscribers to higher numbers. Helps us do everything we want to do here at the chessbrah for all of the plans that we have.